Welcome to the 1 o'clock session. I'm James Williams, one of the co-founders of this thing, Wichita Startup Week. 1 o'clock session, technology companies and startups in Kansas, you are not alone. Before I go too farther, fun fact, Incubus is warming up next door. So if this place rattles apart, that's what's going on, and I think we just embrace it because that's what being in downtown Wichita is all about, which I think is super cool. So Wichita Startup Week is powered by Koch Industries. Now's the time to celebrate and realize our entrepreneurial opportunities. It's 100% volunteer-led, which I have to say it every time, but it still blows my mind. Everything you see here was done by a volunteer. It's also in partnership with Techstars, a worldwide network to help entrepreneurs succeed. Before we get too much further, just want to thank all of our sponsors. Koch Industries is our presenting sponsor, EY for our hackathon, Cox Business for the pitch competition tonight at 6 o'clock. Somebody's going to be winning $5,000. We have a giant check printed. That's going to be fun to give away. We have Voltage and Emprise Bank for powering our trade show, and you've seen other sponsors rotating throughout the whole day. This session is part of the idea and pre-product track presented actually by Fidelity Bank. I'd like to bring up John DeCicero to say a few words. Give it up for John.
So this is as close as I'm ever going to get to being played on by Incubus. So I'm gonna relish this moment. So I am John, and I work for the fourth generation family-owned Fidelity Bank, headquartered right here in Wichita, Kansas. Yeah, and at the bank, we talk a lot about the intersection of bravery and business and how that can happen anytime, anywhere. And that when it does happen, that represents a huge opportunity for meaningful progress. And it occurs to me that one of those intersections is happening right here, and they have been happening all week. Many of you have ideas that you're trying to push forward, you're trying to grow, trying to make sustainable and valuable, and that's commendable. That entrepreneurial spirit is inspiring. But what's also as important as that individual effort is coming together like this, when we find time to come together and listen to each other, learn from each other, and share our experiences. And it seems like that should be an easy thing, but it's not. Something like this, putting these moments together, takes a ton of work. And being here, really being here, engaged and doing the work, takes courage. And it also broadens the entire net of opportunity for all of us. So I want to thank you for being here and being engaged, because you're moving our community bravely onward. With that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Brian McClendon. He's currently co-founder and CEO of CV Key Project, a group that is building apps to help America get back to work during the pandemic. He also founded KansasVotes.org, which has helped over 100,000 Kansans register to vote or get an advanced ballot. He's a research professor at the University of Kansas, there after spending 2 years at Uber, leading their Maps and Business Platforms programs. For 10 years prior, Brian was vice president with Google, and he led the entire Geo business unit, including Google Maps, Street View, and Google Earth. He was a founder and angel investor in Keyhole Incorporated, a geospatial data visualization company that was purchased by Google in 2004 and led to Google Earth. In the 90s, he spent 8 years at Silicon Graphics designing 3D graphics workstations. He was inducted into the National Academy of Engineering in 2015 and holds a degree in electrical engineering from the University of Kansas. He also ran for Kansas Secretary of State in 2018. Please help me welcome Brian McClendon.
Thank you. Can you hear me on this microphone? Yes, good. That sounds right. Thank you for the introduction, and I'll probably add a couple of things that help more explain what I'm going to be talking about today. So just to explain the title, so Free State Forage is the sort of investment vehicle that my wife and I do startup investments in, and it has a website. And early in 2019, I decided to collect and publish this map of Kansas and all the tech companies and startups within it. Now, it turns out there is no collection. You have to go make it. And so this will be the story of that. But I'm also going to talk about tech hiring, both as a startup and sort of just tech companies in the state generally, and maybe even opine a little bit about remote work. So that's the outline, and let's get into it. So this is the map, this is the end result, and you can go to the website and search on it and click on any of these little icons and see all the companies. And the purpose of this map was to explain both to ourselves and to the rest of the world that there's a lot of tech in Kansas and in Kansas City. And by the way, I include Kansas City, Missouri in my map, kind of like Trump. I take the black Sharpie and bring that one in. Because there's so much going on that side of the river, but is close enough, and there's so much intermix across State Line Road. So getting this map was hard. It turns out that, many people know about Cerner and Garmin, Cessna, and all of the companies in Wichita. Coke obviously is one of the biggest employers, but you just don't have visibility into everybody that's working in this space. And what we wanted to do was show, the breadth of opportunity, and as well as the capability. So how did I do this? Well, you go look at Startland News, you go look at KC Business Journal, you go look at Crunchbase, and try and find all these companies. And it turns out there is no one place that's even close to correct. And anytime you sort of dig down to ground, either the companies have been renamed, they're dead, they're changed, or they're missing. So this took a lot of elbow grease, and I won't recommend it as a long-term solution, but it was really important to me to get this picture right. So we did this in 19, and I've just updated it, sort of post-COVID is too strong a word, but very recently. Why to do it? So the challenge with hiring and recruiting tech talent in our region is that we need to convince people to stay here. And many of them perceive their own job as the only tech job that they're going to find in the state. And so when they look for a new job, they immediately just, go to the coasts, go generically across the United States, because they don't think there's anything nearby. The other thing is, when you want to bring people to this region, when you want to recruit somebody into Wichita or Kansas City or Lawrence, and you've got a great company, and they go, yeah, that's good, but if I move here, if I pick up my family and come here and buy that house that you're promising is so much cheaper in Kansas, and it doesn't work out, then I'm kind of hosed and I have to go undo all this stuff. And the answer is no. There are other opportunities in every one of these cities that, even if the first job isn't quite right, there are plenty of other chances. And that's a critical thing that you have to offer people, because it's a huge risk to just go in for one thing. And the Garmins and the Cerners of the world, have figured out ways to get people in, and they're a very huge company, and they sort of embrace them with all sorts of transfers and funding of houses and so forth. But for the rest of us, for the smaller companies, you can't do that. You have to give them a story that they can believe. And then, of course, there's the two-body problem. Like, where's my spouse going to work? What job opportunities are they going to be? And he or she is in a different industry, but is still in tech, but needs to be over here. And is it health, science, sports, whatever? So you need to convince them that moving here is a safe enough bet that they're willing to do it. And so we spent a lot of time trying to show people that. So this is a truism that I think probably everybody here understands, but I'll just say it anyway, that the only job growth comes from new companies, and new companies come from startups. Big companies grow, shrink, or die. The net job growth for all existing companies is zero. So you, creating startups here in Wichita, you're the only hope for employment growth in Wichita. If you stop, if there are no startups, we will shrink, because all those other big companies will kind of just permeate. And this has always been true. And if you do the math, the average size company, it all kind of works out. Startups are the only path to growth. And if we want more tech jobs, and if we want more jobs at all in this region, we need to create startups. And the surprising thing, and I think this is the most interesting thing I found in the search, was that, startups are nearly everywhere in the region, and there are way more of them than you think. And this slide here is actually wrong. It says there's 230. There are more than that, and we'll get to that in a minute. But how many of them can you name, right? How many startups, other than your own, for some of the people who are here, how many startups can you name? And, in Kansas, C2FO is relatively famous. They've, raised hundreds of millions of dollars now, and they're growing to 400 or 500 people. Everybody can kind of name that one if they're pushed to name one. But most of the rest are too small to be on most people's radar unless they happen to get a little bit of press in Startland News, which only startups read. And so how do we get more awareness of these startups in the area? So some of the learnings I had were that, Kansas City, Missouri and Lawrence are actually great for creating startups. There are more of them per capita there than anywhere else. But the reverse problem's true. There's a lot of startups, but they're not turning into the big companies. And Lawrence is like, I'll show you some numbers that make it show it's the kind of the worst example of this. We need to figure out how to not just create startups, but turn them into bigger companies. And I'm not going to talk about investment today. I think there's other people yesterday and today that are going to talk more about investment. But it is critical to building companies and making them grow fast, because in this industry, in all industries, if you're a startup, you have to grow fast or die, right? You can try and bootstrap and grow slow, but if you have an idea that's good, somebody else could come beat you. And so there's a reason why capital makes companies succeed, at risk of dilution and various other things. So here's for people who are numbers, I'm entirely about numbers. This is the sort of the bottom line. There's 241 startups that I found with my wife and with some other help and lots of searching of data. I'm sure there are some missing, but there are fewer missing today than there were when I did this the first time. There's 771 tech companies that employ a computer science, engineering, health professional in a product development role. So I don't count like hospitals and doctors' offices. Those are certainly professionals, but they're not technical product professionals. But if they're somebody building a medical device, then I would count them, for example. But in general, these are tech employees. So IT, computer science, product management, that category. And this, I've found on the order of 38,000 tech employees, and in these companies, there's almost 225,000 overall employees. So it's a huge part of our industry. Unfortunately, it's not as big as it should be. We need to be bigger because we can do better. Startups per capita, tech employees per capita, and then, squeaking in that Kansas City, Missouri demographic makes the region bigger than just Kansas. So these are the well-known ones. Cerner, I split into two, the Kansas and Missouri versions. So the Missouri version's big, the Kansas version's smaller, and is rumored to be shrinking. But as far as I can tell, that hasn't happened yet. We seem to be heavyweight in a lot of engineering firms in Kansas City that do contracting and consulting, and that's fine, but that's not what I'm interested in. I want to build product and build scale, and those companies basically scale exactly at the size of their employment. Another one that's very unusual is Honeywell FMT. I'm not sure many people know about this, but Honeywell has, I think it was federal something. Yeah, anyway, they basically make nuclear bombs safer, and they employ several thousand people, several thousand technical people, and they're in Kansas City, and most people don't know what they do. But it is important and a bit scary, and there's a lot of sharp people there. Garmin, a lot of people know. Spirit, obviously, is a big anchor here in Wichita, and DST, another health company, and then the Federal Reserve. Who knew it? But they have a lot of coders working at the Federal Reserve. So again, here's the map. Here's a map of the startups. And you can see they're not quite as broadly distributed, but there's still some in Manhattan, a couple in Emporia, a lot in Wichita, and this one little lone Western outcast who really should be part of Wichita. It's Greenfield Robotics. And so they're just a little bit west of Wichita. As I said, C2FO, Some of these have been acquired. I believe Payet has sort of been acquired, but not really. Bardavon's good and growing. Storable acquired Red Nova, which was the actual startup. Civic Plus is one that's in Manhattan that a lot of people don't know about, but they build websites and infrastructure for a lot of government areas. And in fact, if you go, many of the COVID sites that were initially built were built with Civic Plus. Others were built with Esri because they wanted geospatial. So these are across the entire region. Now I'll talk a little bit about just Kansas. If you limit it to not Missouri, then Sprint, Garmin, Spirit become winners. NetSmart appears down there. Not much interesting. Startups here, we start to reach into Farm Mobile, which was a very interesting farm agriculture monitoring system. They just got bought, which I only recently, like in the last 5 days, found out. So that's very new. TradeWinds was acquired, but you can see that the ag tech and energy and health seem to be where a lot of it is, with one big fintech company there at the top. And if we skip out of Kansas City entirely, then we're seeing a whole lot of Wichita. So this is obviously, you're the biggest population center here, and you have all the big companies. Many of them are historical, but NetApp is one that continues to employ a lot of technical people. SE2 in Topeka. And then the engineering departments start to show up because, there's a lot of tech folks in academics, and they do count. I count them for their potential to start companies rather than their actual day-to-day job. Because, I have hope. I'm editorializing in the middle of things. So what to learn here is that Lawrence is a hotbed of creating very small startups that don't grow. And so we need help funding Lawrence startups. And, Leawood, Olathe, Overland Park all do very well. Wichita does pretty well, but I think certainly, something like this space here, which I had heard about for the last two years, but got to visit today for the first time. So if you haven't seen this building, Groover Labs is awesome. It's the best site probably in the entire region for what it's trying to do. And, I think Wichita should be very proud. We need more startups formed and more communications like this group, and I'll get more into that. Picture of the KC Metro, top tech employers in the Metro. You guys are Wichita folks, you don't care. I will talk about Lawrence because I care. So here's like a list of all the tech employers in Lawrence, and you probably don't know most of them. The big ones like Educational Testing Service, is very quiet off in Eastern Lawrence. And then there's A. Einstein, which I'm on the board of, which is building really cool radar products. Matterport is a company based in Sunnyvale, but they have a big tech office or a big tech presence in Lawrence. They had a big office, but rumor has it right now they are now working from home, and they may continue just to work from home in Lawrence. So we'll see if they rejoin the physical. Decipher is a $1 billion IPO company that is technically headquartered in New York, but is entirely, all the work is done in Lawrence. And so that was pretty cool. Alarm.com is the current incarnation of sort of the IoT security stuff that came out of Motorola and Lowe's and things like that. But there's 59 other companies employing tech folks in Lawrence beyond this. And, that's great, but overall, Lawrence tech employment is not as impressive as I'd like. Wichita, on the other hand, has a very nice map if we include Greenfield over there. I think that the companies that I've talked to, I found some that I just didn't know existed, like National Institute for Aviation Research actually has a whole bunch of people working there on really cool projects, and seems to me like something that should be spinning out startups. But I haven't talked to anybody closely enough to know whether that's true, but they are, a big population center. WSU obviously is there, but we have Coke, NetApp, Cessna, and Spirit And you guys can probably tell me more about sort of the direction that Spirit is going. I know it's been a hard business, and the 737 made life difficult, but I sense that Wichita is still doing reasonably well on the aviation side. This is what I'm most interested in, and some of you may be able to tell me I'm wrong here. From my research, these are the top startups in Wichita, and there should be a longer list of bigger companies here. So if you think your company should be on this list, email me afterwards, and I will add it. But these are the ones that I found, and all the way down to Groover Labs down there at the bottom, with Gur and Uver being the two technical people, I think. We need more startups like this, because this is where the next set of Wichita employers is going to come from. And we need these to get funded. Now, I talked to two companies that aren't on this list, or aren't on any list, because they just started in the last few months. And both of them actually have gotten funding, which is pretty exciting. So I think there are things happening in town, but this is what I was able to pull out of the data. So to talk about the changes that we've seen, even though COVID has been a problem, tech employment continues to grow in the region. And, some of this was, obviously I found more companies with, more diligence and more people telling me the map was wrong, which is fine. But there are existing companies that are definitely, recruiting and growing at very high speed. One that I'll just call out that I happened to run into the CEO of was Orange EV in Riverside, Missouri, is building electric trucks. And they're mostly for sort of dock / field transport of but in any case, they are now at 150 people, and they've grown like over 150% in the last 18 months. So they are rocking it, and they're raising around, if you didn't know. There are definitely startups that are growing, but we need a lot more of them to do that. Just as a disclaimer, so some of the names that have appeared on the list, these are ones that Beth or myself have invested in. And so, I won't go through them all, just, that I do have some financial interest in at least some of them. Some of them I advise, some of them I invested in. What did I learn from this, and what are we recommending we do about this? One of them is that we deeply need more computer scientists. All of these companies need more computer scientists. There are well over 2,000 open computer science jobs in Kansas right now. And, one thing to model it on is that, I was involved sort of in the creation of the University Engineering Initiative Act of 2012. And this was a deal between the state and the top 6 universities to produce more engineering graduates. And they spent, I think it's, $10 million a year in state funding and $10 million a year from the universities. And they managed to produce 550 more graduates per year in engineering. And that's great. But we need 1,000 more per year in computer science. So we need to do the same thing, but for computer science specifically. And when I tried to raise this with certain engineering leadership, they said, no, we can't do it right now. We need to get this engineering thing refunded. And they did. It's done. So now we can talk about publicly, and I think you should advocate for the universities creating more computer science graduates, so that, the startups around here can find the knowledge they need. I talked about, Lawrence has an office space problem. I don't understand why, but, doing a 20 to 30 to 50 person technology office in Lawrence is actually pretty hard. It shouldn't be. We have BTBC now, but that's for smaller, and there just hasn't been enough real estate. So I've talked to people about some projects that are happening, but one of the reasons Matterport went virtual was they couldn't find a space, and that's not cool. We need to build better community forums for Kansas City tech employees in general to talk to each other. And I am not as deeply involved in that community as I should be, but I've talked to several people, and there's just not enough of this happening in Kansas City, and there needs to be. And finally, there was one thing I asked for last year was allow elective credit for computer science in Kansas high schools, and that happened. So wasn't because of me. I did testify, but there was a whole bunch of people who worked really hard on it, and it was a 10-0 vote, and so it was a slam dunk once they got it explained to them. So in the ecosystem, what can we do to do more for startups? And this one is motherhood and apple pie to this group. More education on establishing high growth technology startups. And I call out Casey Pipeline, Techstars, the Casey Collective, this group, Wichita Startup Week. And I also teach a class called Startup School. I did it in spring of 2020, and I'll probably do it in spring of 2022. And we need to do more of that. We need to get people thinking more entrepreneurially with respect to tech. We need more seed funds. The Digital Sandbox and Fifth in Kansas City are pretty good, but we need a lot more of that. I don't know if there's anything directly analogous in Wichita, but we can talk. The biggest one is that investors in Kansas and the region are not risk tolerant. They are very conservative, and they talk to founders of startups in a conservative way, and that leads to conservatism, which leads to moving too slowly. The way that high growth technology startups work is you take a financial risk. You put that money in not for a 7% return. You put that money in because you either want 0 or you want 10 to 100x return. And as a startup founder, you need to deliver one of those two results. And that 0 is kind of scary, right? You might, flame out. You might have picked the wrong horse. You might have aimed in the wrong market direction. You might go to 0. But the reason that, all of the big companies and all of the innovations that we're seeing in tech happen is because people move fast and aim, and some of them hit. And if just 1 in 10 of you, the 10 startups in this room, hits, you're going to make, $100 million to $1 billion in valuation or revenue, and you're going to change the lives of all of your employees that you're about to hire 1,000 of in Wichita. That's a reason to run, but it means taking investment, and it means getting investors to give you investment, and regional investors need to be less conservative. So that was a bit preachy. We need to allow angel tax credits to be resold for in-state investors. That's just a weird little point. Too many startups are LLCs. LLCs are bad. I'm sorry if you've already LLC'd. Switch over and be a C Corp. And for one, governance is better, but most importantly, and unless Biden's thing nukes this, the Section 1202 qualified small business exclusion means that for the money that is invested in a startup prior to it being worth $50 million, capital gains after 5 years is 0% on that investment up to $10 million of gains. That's been true for the last 10 years, but it's only true for C Corps. It is not true for LLCs. So, as an investor, I will never invest in an LLC because of that. Now, there's some risk that Biden will nuke that, and we're trying very hard to stop that. We'll see what happens. And then finally, I think I mentioned this, we need more university-created startups. We have some great faculty, some great ideas. K-State, KU, Wichita State, I've talked to, all of them at different times about very good ideas, but the path to making a company has been too slow and not as well supported, both by the university and kind of by the mindset of the institution itself. And we need to help them, because if you want some good ideas, if you're looking for some tech, they have it, but they're not productizing it and they're not turning it into a company. Okay, so that was TechMap Kansas. That's what I learned. I'm going to go into a little bit of my opinions about remote work because it seems relevant to today. So what are the risks with COVID and post-COVID, and what does it mean for us? Well, one of the negatives is that, the Googles and the Amazons of the world are getting more tolerant of remote work. And what that means is that they can start to recruit some of your people, some of the people you want to hire, and hire them and have them work in Wichita and they don't have to leave. So a set of people who want to be in Wichita, love, being near their homes, near their families, whatever it is, could start working for one of these big companies at a higher salary. And unfortunately, that means that, the value of technology employees is going to go, the cost is going to go up, commensurate with this. And there's kind of nothing we can do about it. And you're seeing it already that everybody is turning jobs right now. Like, COVID has made people look up. Some people take time off, made other people go heads down. All of that is changing right now. And companies are figuring out how they're going to approach it. And some companies are doing this hybrid model, which is 3 days a week in the office, which is, that's fine if you're in Silicon Valley and you don't have to drive for 2 days a week to your office, but it's not remote work. It just saves you a bit of time, which, by the way, would be very nice back when I was in Silicon Valley. The other side is regional pay. So some of the Silicon Valley companies are allowing their employees to move back to Kansas or back to Midwest or whatever, but they're going to dock their pay by 25%. And in fiscal terms, it's actually a win for the employee to be in Kansas at 25% less. But psychologically, it's actually, they're struggling with taking money away, and they haven't figured it out yet. There's also very different opinions about remote work. So Twitter, everybody's remote, it's all cool that, we can do this forever. Facebook is, you're all coming back into the office and we only have a few offices and those are the rules. So I don't think there are any clear answers yet. But my experience, COVID changed everything, right? For me in Kansas, I was able to work on an even basis with a bunch of other people on a project all over the world because Zoom makes everybody equal. We're all the same postage stamp. And that's great. However, when people start coming back to the office, and I don't know if you've experienced it yet, but when you're the remote person and there's a conference room over there, you're the odd one out. And technology, Zoom, everything else hasn't solved it. And I'm going to, go on film and give you a startup idea, which is that there is going to be a company or companies that produce effectively two cameras, one a high-resolution 360 sitting in the middle of the conference table, and another a high-resolution camera sitting below the big screen at the end of the conference room. And it will split up and track all the faces and the people and will identify the speaker of the moment, and it will use enough microphones to nuke all of the bad noises, and then we'll get back to one picture per person and some level of equality. But today's tech, unfortunately, isn't there. So Logitech, makes a decent camera, but they don't innovate at all. Owl is a new camera. If you haven't seen it, it's kind of going in the right direction. It's that center camera. It's not good enough yet. And Zoom and Teams and Google Meet and all these folks, they haven't done anything yet. But it's going to have to happen, because if it doesn't happen, remote workers are not going to be as productive. They're not going to feel included. And I think it matters. Another thing I learned, when working with remotes is that time zone matters. In many ways, central time zone's good. You get to work with the East Coast and the West Coast moderately equal. And if you're working down, with Brazil and Argentina, it works pretty well. But Asia, and in particular India, is still very, very hard. But Europe is not quite as hard. And so I did a lot of remote work with people across the world, and that was, one of the things I learned. And finally, for those of us who need to build companies, if you can't convince them to move to Kansas, but they can do remote work, you can actually have them join your startup here, but living and working wherever they are now. And in many ways, that's a low-risk join opportunity. So the big problem with a startup in Kansas is moving to Kansas to join a startup is a two-risk procedure. It's the financial risk of working with the startup, and it's moving your whole family physically into Kansas. Well, if you start out with remote work, you've kind of, subtracted one half of the risk, and you can at least try it out. And once you've proven that your company is successful and is a good fit and everything's good, maybe then get them to move to Kansas. So I think there's a lot of hope here to be able to recruit people from outside and bring them in. And especially folks who went to Wichita State, went to KU, went to K-State, went off to the coasts because that was where the jobs were. We need to recruit those folks back home. Many of them have families here and have other reasons to be here, but they don't know about the cool jobs they could have. So I think there's opportunities here. We need to grow startups in the region, and remote work is very scary, but I think it opens a lot of opportunities. And I'm happy to answer any questions on any topic.
Let's give a round of applause for Brian. We got about 5 to 7 minutes of questions. Who's first?
So right now, one of our incentives for Kansas is the Kansas Angel Tax Credits. And it actually requires us to have 70% of our employee force here in Kansas, but it's probably one of the best in the country in terms of tax credit benefits.
Yes.
Is that something that, is not going to be as useful for remote workers then? Or is that going to detract from?
If we hold to the 70%, then yeah, obviously that limits you to 30% remote work. So you can still have some, but I haven't actually looked closely at that. And is the wording on it strictly 70% all employees, or?
I'm pretty confident.
Okay. Yeah. So that is an interesting point, because you're right that the Angel Tax Credit is very valuable, makes early investment in Kansas startups much cheaper, and maybe we can talk to them about that. But I doubt we'll get it below 50, but who knows? Maybe Secretary Toland can do something for us.
Other questions?
What is your opinion, or I guess outlook, on some type of organizational initiative within different companies to bring people back from the coasts? Is there any time frame that you've examined based on people leaving, or do you have any opinion on how much time companies should spend bringing these people back? What the next steps are to get there in the first place?
I've thought about it a bit, and I think the time frame to bring people back is when their families need to go to preschool or kindergarten, because that's a commitment, and it's also not a great experience in the rest of the country. And so maybe they got married, had kids, and that's the time when they're, it's a bit hard to get them to change at that moment, but that is the time when they go, gee, being near the grandparents would be great, and the schools that I grew up in, I know them, they're good, and I want to bring my kids back. So I think from a timing perspective, somewhere in the 4 to 7 years out of school range seems to be a good target, because they've already gotten their sort of out of Kansas experience and realized it's not quite as great as they thought it was. And then you can use targeted tools like LinkedIn, or I hesitate to say it, but Facebook, to address these people who, unfortunately, those LinkedIn and Facebook know exactly who they are. Facebook knows where they went to grade school, and LinkedIn at least knows where they went to college. So.
Thanks, Brian. What's the best way for us to help get the Wichita data and the map updated?
If you go to the website, there's links to fill out a form that gives the information or corrections.
Yeah.
So yeah, please do. You can email me directly, but it's more efficient to fill out that form, because that'll get the data updated, and
Awesome.
we republish hopefully once every month or so.
These two guys help run a Slack with a bunch of local founders in it, so maybe we can commit to getting some help for you there to get updated. And then one last one, I appreciate all the work you've done in Topeka. Big advocate of the Kansas Angel Investor Tax Credit Program. You had Darcy Howe at Casey Rice sitting here as a rock star at raising capital. I'm about a third of the way through a $15 million fundraise. Have you heard or been in any conversations of taking the Kansas Angel Tax Credit model for LPs and funds?
No, I haven't. I don't quite know how they would handle it. I mean, there's obviously the upper limit, right? It's 100K per investor per year, and 50 per investment, I believe, is the restriction. So, oh, okay. So it's twice that? Oh, okay. Well, I've never hit the limit, so and that's actually one of the biggest challenges. You know, the angel tax credit is not too small. Unfortunately, the startup community is not aware enough of it and not using it enough. It's a bit of a pain to sign up for, not too much, but a bit of a pain. But for those who don't know, you know, it basically does a 50% match with the investor. It gives them a credit on their tax for half of the investment. So in the grand scheme of things, it cuts the risk in half for anybody investing in one of these qualified Kansas companies. So if you can get, you know, angel tax credits for your company as you're raising money, you will get angels to invest. It's a very strong attractant, and it's a $6 million fund that has not ever been fully utilized in 1 year. And so, you know, first goal, let's empty the fund and then have a discussion about growing it. So that's my recommendation.
I was wondering if you had any insights into peer cities based on the data you have for like Wichita and Kansas City. Are there peer cities to those communities that are worth looking at, who are maybe in a position that is attainable for those communities?
Yeah, you know, cities that I've been surprised with their success. So, you know, the typical city that Lawrence gets compared to is Boulder. But Boulder, it's not fair. I mean, to a degree, Kansas City and Denver are similar, but Boulder actually was surrounded by IBM and a whole bunch of storage companies. And the startup community in Boulder and the technology company and the famous investor who wrote a bunch of books over there all came out of that tech sort of fallout from these big companies. And so what we're missing for the most part is tech companies with big fallout. Wichita has, you know, for better or worse, you know, fallout from Boeing and Spirit and lesser from Cessna. Cessna is not falling out anybody. But, you know, some number of people coming out of those created companies. But Kansas City doesn't really have like a big exploding tech company. They had the Ford and you know, some car manufacturing, but that's not an engineering and tech area. So I think what we're missing is sort of a large evolving tech employment turning into the startups that, you know, hire the next generation. So Nashville is surprisingly good. St. Louis is better than I thought by quite a bit. St. Louis is actually better than Kansas City. You know, I hate to say it. It goes against everything I believe in, but especially in baseball. So, you know, that's one. And, you know, is there a city we can really model after? I mean, the problem is it is a 20-year process, right? You know, and so you have to, what are the steps we take now to end up in a good space in 20 years? Because it takes a while to build the ecosystem.
We have time for one more.
My question is, well, I'm a website developer and I build apps. I've been building a really good one for the last 7 years that should be very, very profitable.
Mm-hmm.
Why I am here today is because I've just all been on the tech side. And I need to get in the business side to start. So that's why I'm here today.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is, I heard you mention that you don't invest in LLCs. For a person that's trying to find that investment, because it's a really big thing,
Mm-hmm.
Is there like a website? How do I find the investors that will invest in the tech world things? I mean, is there a website you can go?
You're asking the question that everybody asks, which is how do I find investors? And, you know, I wish, you know, it's, you know, Darcy would say it's easy, you know, just, you know, throw your thing over the transom and we'll evaluate it and go. You know, Free State Forge, which we run, has a, you know, you can email us your pitch. I think to get venture investment, you know, and venture investment is, you know, it's not, everybody knows about putting money in a restaurant, right? The restaurant's going to grow to this size, it's going to yield this much money, and that's its kind of ceiling. But people know that, and they also know that restaurants fail. venture investing is different. We're not really interested in, sustaining a 10 or 20 person company. You're either going to be 1,000-person company because your idea is great and there's a line of sight to growing the market and your product to build a $100 million revenue 1,000-person business, or we don't want to invest because to put money in, we know that 9 out of 10 of you, or 7 out of 10 are going to go to zero, 2 out of 10 are going to trundle along, and one of them is going to be a home run. And that home run has to pay for the whole batch. And so I'm begging you, please be the home run. So there you go.
Connect with the founders, Startup ICT, Slack, and we can show you some of the investors we've been in contact with based on your idea. More than happy to make connections. So please join us in that conversation. We'll help you out. Big round of applause for Brian.
Thank you.
Some
Thank you.
and a little zip for you. Awesome. All right, we have 12 minutes until 2 o'clock, which will be Dan Kerr from Flyover Capital. He is going to talk about raising money in the middle of the country. So he is speaking from the VC perspective. And then we'll have Thomas Chapman at 3 o'clock talking about raising money from the founder perspective. And then 4 o'clock, we're going to be talking product market fit, the most important topic in a startup product. So stick around and we'll see you then. Thank you.